person in the center of the social ethical reflection for Pope Francis in his pronouncements, in his few pronouncements, which he gave us in the few months of his pontificate, have underlined the dimension of the activity of the person, of the dignity, of the active dignity of the person, which then is realized in the dimension that a person is providing for herself and for others through work, and in the constitution of society through the quality of brotherhood and forgiveness. These dimensions, which are considered without any doubt in a religious dimension, have to be translated rationally translated, because otherwise they cannot be applicated as propositions to the concrete question how society has to be thought, has to be constructed, how a constitution, how legislation of society can work, can concretely work. And an immense reflection, a reflection of an importance, of a primary importance for Christianity in modernity, is the philosophy of right of Rosmini. Philosophy of right of Rosmini, which Rosmini wrote in the 40s of the 19th century, and in which he proposed a work which is almost of the same importance and also of the same reflective structure than the philosophy of right of Hegel, for an example. And we read in a central point of the philosophy of right of Rosmini, of which we consider in this time only the dimension of the person and the social dimensions, the social relationships of person, these dimensions who were required by Pope Francis, but which contains evidently very many other and deeper reflections worthy to be analyzed. And this philosophy of right, Rosmini says in paragraph 49 of the first part, precision requires that we say the human person is subsistent human right. It follows that the person is the essence of right. The person as the essence of right. In this paragraph we have the most anthropological definition of right that we can find in history of right, of juridical ideas. Rosmini is identifying right with the person. Right is not identical with the sum of the laws. Right is not deriving from government. Right is not even situated on the level of state or of civil society. No, right is the person. In the same time, we have, versus modernity, an anthropological foundation of right, and we have, versus tradition, the transportation of the right from its situation in natural right, in the natural law, to human person. While in St. Thomas and in the Christian tradition we talk about nature right, Rosmini is realizing the personalization of right. The dimension that right, rather than on nature, is found on the liberty of person, on individuality. And that in this individuality is not giving right to modernity, to the individuality of modernity, but of the person in the whole dimensions, in the whole social dimensions of her liberty, which includes relationship to the absolute, which includes relationship to the others. And this is the fundamental structure, the fundamental thought of Rosmini's philosophy of right. And I repeat the definition of right. The human person is subsistent human right. It follows that the person is the essence of right. This, we can see, is the presupposition. If we can see, it is a rational fundament of the affirmations of Pope Francis we analyzed in the last lesson. And 2 paragraphs after, Rosmini says, "It follows from our definition of right that personship is of the essence of right." Right is, as Rosmini here proposes another definition of right, but which which is not different from the first one, but which adds another other dimensions, we could say. Right is a moral physical activity which cannot be harmed by other persons. If person is right, but action of person is nothing that could be considered only an accident of a person. For Rosmini, action of a person as realization of her liberty is on the same point the real realization of the person herself. In this way, if we deal not with a momental action, an action a person is acting by mere reflex or by instinct or by not thinking, but if a person is realizing a certain action as a realization of her liberty, is realizing, in other words, an action of moral liberty, then this action cannot be harmed by other persons. Then this action is expression of the authentic personality of the person, and then this action is right. Of its essence, says Rosmini, person has all the elements that form the definition of right. As we said, the person is an intellective subject insofar it contains a supreme active principle. The person is an intellective subject insofar it contains a supreme active principle. Personality is activity. And the supreme principle of person in Rosmini is the intuition of the idea of being. We will deal in the second part of these lessons of what it means, intuition of idea of being in Rosmini. But let's say it is the relationship to the absolute. Person is constituted because person has an inner, an immanent relationship to the absolute. Every person. Every person, because every person is constituted by God. Not only created in its real nature, but created in its personality, created in its liberty. First of all, the dimensions of liberty, of personality, of morality are dimensions in which the absolute is in a certain way reflected in nature, is immanent in nature. In which person is the real imagine of the absolute, of God. And this, what is affirmed by all Christian tradition, whose meaning is underlining, is reflecting specifically for the person. And this is why, first of all, in its active dimensions, not in its passivity, but in its activity, in its personality, person is the image of the absolute. Not in its passive depending, in its active self-realization. The absolute is thought in an authentic way only if it is realized in the immanent principle of moral self-realization of person. When person is realizing herself as the image of God, and person is realizing herself as an image of God in theoretical and speculative conscience and in real actions, or in Rosminian words, in truth and love. In truth and love. And here are ontologically reflected also the two principal concepts of Benedict XVI, truth and charity. But what that means we will see in the second part of this course. For now, it is important to underline that in these active dimensions, person is realizing her imageness of the absolute. It is not substituting the absolute. It is not absolutizing herself, but it's realizing her dignity as an image of God. And in paragraph 60, Rosmini says, we can safely say that the human person is the first proper seat of dual freedom, and human nature the first proper seat of ownership. The person is the first seat of dual freedom. Freedom is nothing that it is given to the person by the state. Freedom is nothing that person is realizing only because person is in society. No, freedom is in the person herself. This does not mean that freedom is given just by nature. Freedom is not identified with nature. Freedom lies in the person as a principle which is not nature. It lies in the person in the principle which is transcending nature. But not because it is transcending nature, it is given by political society. Rosmini founds the person on this transcendental principle to distinguish person either from a mere natural constitution, either from its dependency on society. Rather, society is constituted by persons who are able of social rationality and relationship. So, the person is the first seat of dual freedom, and human nature is the proper seat of ownership. Person is not only an intellective, is not only a principle of freedom, person is not only abstract. Person is also real, person is incarnated, person is a body. And in this real dimension of body, this freedom has to be realized also concretely, and it is realized in ownership. This does not mean that Rosmini is materializing human freedom. This does not mean that Rosmini, like contemporary liberalists, is identifying personality and personal rights only with the right of ownership, or worse, with the fact of ownership. The right of ownership is one of the fundamental individual rights, also for Rosmini, and Rosmini is a liberal. But personality is not identified with the fact of ownership, like we see it in Nozick or others. And here is the difference. And in this way, Rosmini is not materializing freedom, but he is personalizing ownership. Rosmini said, as Hegel said, but in another way, but this philosophically would be to be analyzed in another lesson. Like Hegel, not like merely like Hegel, quite like Hegel, Rosmini said that the first property is our body, because the principle of person is incarnated, is first realized, is the first material, the first natural realization of the principle of person is the own body. So also the own body is a certain dimension of ownership, of property. And this ownership is not the private ownership on material things. It's the first dimension of personalizing materia. But not only the proper body. Through the proper body, we are personalizing all the things we own. And personalizing all the things we own makes sure that, it says Rosmini, everyone who disturbs my private property is disturbing my personality. I feel concretely ache when someone is coming into my own. And this is why for Rosmini we have the two dimensions of the freedom and on the ownership. Freedom and ownership are constituting the juridical dimension of the person. Freedom, the activity, and the ownership, which is the result of our activity. Therefore, also the dimension of work, as Pope Francis said, is very important, because in the dimension of work, in a socially definitive sense, person is realizing herself. Today we are thinking evidently on a work, on a social defined work. We go to work, we earn, so on a salary-based work. But work in an anthropological sense, work in a Christian sense, is more than salary-based work. Salary-based work, it's the work like it was defined in the last 2 centuries. But work is very more. Work is the authentic, it's an authentic dimension of realizing of the person, with which person is providing for herself and for others. So we have here in the first principles of the philosophy of right the rational foundation of what we read in the address of Pope Francis to the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifice Foundation. Then Rosmini is analyzing another dimension, because Rosmini is not only speaking about the individual. It is not only the individual, the protagonist of the philosophy of right. The philosophy of right has 2 parts, the individual right and the social right. Because the person is in a socially definitive way in relationship. Because this relationship is characterizing not its nature, not its political constitution, but its liberty. Also here Rosmini is very close to Hegel. Liberty has a social structure. Liberty, we cannot think about liberty without the profound relationship of liberty to the absolute. Liberty is required absolute. Otherwise, liberty is no personal liberty. Otherwise, liberty is not activeness. So the first society, the first social dimension of person, says Rosmini, is not the political dimension, is the dimension of that what he calls the theocratic society. Theocratic society, I said, is not a political dimension. So Rosmini does not think about a theocracy, a political theocracy. Rosmini thinks about that society in which people have social relationships, and God himself, the absolute himself, is the reason for these relationships, is the concrete head of these relationships. And so the concrete realization of this theocratic society is for Rosmini the church. The church is realizing, it is not at 100%, but quite identical with the theocratic society. And this theocratic society results on the nature of person, results of the liberty of person. Every person has a liberty which transcends the material constitution of person. And if it transcends the material constitution of person, it's revolved not only to the liberty of others, because liberty of person can never be satisfied by the liberty of others. The liberty of others is that what liberty is searching. But liberty, searching liberty of others, goes always beyond the liberty of others. And only in an absolute liberty it finds satisfaction, because only from this liberty, personal liberty acquires its activeness. And so the theocratic society that Rosmini calls theocratic society is the first social realization of the liberty of person. But in this church, the members are only the Christians, the members who by baptism are members of the church. But Rosmini says, can we think also about a human society? When we think that not only God not only calls person by actual grace into the church, but by creative grace, by creation, he created all the people with intelligence and personality, and all the people by speeches, by creation have intelligence, and So, and therefore the personal principle. Is it possible to think about a society of all the human mankind, is Rosmini asking. And as we see, Rosmini will answer yes. Rosmini is thinking person in its universality, not only as the individual, and the society as particularly realization. When we think about political society, we only have particular societies. If we think about families, we have particular societies. If we think about church, we have a society which de jure is universal, but de facto is particular. Rosmini says, do we have a de jure universal society? And this de jure universal society, Rosmini is treating within the chapter of the theocratic society. And he said the theocratic society is like the visible sign, the visible realization, the concrete realization of that what de jure is universal. Because also the perspective of the church, the mission, the essence of the church is universal, because church is the realization, the real realization of the absolute dimension of the freedom of personhood. And the personhood is of all. And so Rosmini says, in a very beginning sense, not in a complete sense, but in a beginning sense, in a sense of creation, all the people are forming a universal society, and he is talking about the universal society of human mankind. So every person has not only right as individual rights, but also as human rights, as fundamental rights, in the way that we have a universal society. And Rosmini does not only say that the concrete political society has to respect the individual rights of the person, but he says also that the political society has to respect the rights of the universal society. There is a universal society of all the human mankind, which is not visible, which is de jure, but these universal rights of the universal mankind has to be respected by political society. So we have the idea of fundamental human rights, not as individual rights, in the sense that are the rights of the individual, which is before the political society. But before the political society, individual is not without the others. It's in constitutive relationship with the others, because in its natural sense, the individual is just dotated with liberty. Therefore, the preoccupation of the Caritas in Veritate in paragraph 43, which says that individual rights have the problem, are in the danger to go beyond every moral limit, to get crazy, to become crazy, as the encyclical says, and to become egoistic, is just contrared by Rosmini. Rosmini said, no, individual rights cannot be reduced to the egoistic dimension, to get crazy, to get out of every ethical, of every social relationship. Because in its individual nature, every person is in a society of all the human mankind. And he says in paragraph 637 of the second part of the Philosophy of Right, our question asks whether human beings, by their simple coexistence on earth, are joined in a de jure society inherent to their humanity. I am speaking of a de jure society. I do not deny that an external de facto society corresponding to the de jure society may either be lacking or in a deplorable state. As we have said, every society is constituted by a common good, says Rosmini, towards which the wills of several persons aim together in order that all may enjoy it or profit from it. Common good is something constituted by individuals. Common good is not something which is before the individuals. We see that personhood for Rosmini is the very beginning of all society. Person is the very center, person is the very principle of all society. Or as the Second Vatican Council says, is the subject, is the principle, is the beginning of every social institution. So common good is constituted by, it's not only the sum of the individuals, but it is constituted by individuals. And how it is constituted by individuals if it is not the sum? Because it is the same, and it is the same aim, where all the wills come together. So common good is something decided, something want, something realized. And what is realized by all together? The liberty. The liberty realized together. Liberty is the common good. Liberty is that common good which can only be realized together. So in every society of Rosmini, what is fundamentally realized? The liberty. In the theocratic society, in the domestic society, which is a family, and in the political society. And liberty is not divisible from will. So, it cannot be stated a common good, a metaphysical, a political common good against individuals and against the liberty of individuals. And Rosmini says, every human being possesses connatural identical rights, that is, rights having as their object three goods, identical in all human beings, truth, virtue, and happiness. So all human societies are aiming on realizing what? Truth, virtue, and happiness, in which consist the very essence of human person. These three goods can never be the private and exclusive possession of any one person, because they are inexhaustible and unlimited by time and space. Characteristically and essentially, they are common to all. This is the common good. Truth, virtue, and happiness. And how it is realized? In church, family, and civil society. And where it is transcendentally realized, where it is realized in a beginning way, but not in a full way, in all the species of human mankind. And Rosmini says, if society of mankind, as we have described it above, is brought into being by nature, it is a part of socio-natural right, and as such antecedent of positive right which cannot destroy it. No other society or legislation whatsoever can destroy or change the first natural society of mankind without offending, violating, and destroying human nature. Positive laws directed against the basic society of mankind are per se null. So we have the person in its original relationships, in its original liberty, as the very presupposition, as the very a priori of every society. And where does this idea of person come from? This rational idea of person. We have a rational idea of person. Person reflected in its dimension of liberty. Dimension of liberty as person, as private ownership, as social relationship. To realize virtue, truth, and happiness. Where it is found, and Rosmini says, historically, the source of discovering person in these dimensions, is Christianity. Christianity discovered the person just in these dimensions. And now I am quoting the paragraph 496 of the second part of the Philosophy of Right, a paragraph which it is quite similar, quite identical to some affirmations of Hegel. Rosmini, in this conviction that this dimension of freedom of person and this type of social realization of person, in which the social institutions are thought as the ethical realization of human liberty, without absorbing, without cancelling, without eliminating person in the political relationship, this is a sort of a result of Christianity. And we read, it is undeniable that Christianity, by introducing divine love into the world, it is no rational deduction, it is no rational application of natural law, which arrives at this definition of person. It is only the realization of divine love in the world. So divine love in the world is revolutioning the idea of person, revolutioning the idea of person in the long run. After the centuries, it has revolutioned also society after French Revolution. So, by introducing divine love into the world, placed therein a principle of unceasing action, person as action, person as active principle. Pope Francis, person's dignity in active realization, unemployment as the most deplorable state of poverty that has immensely increased and perpetuated human activity. The new presence on earth of an indestructible principle of infinite understanding cannot be ignored. One obvious result of such a principle of freedom is the Christian sense of his own individuality, which goes hand in hand with the development of his new power of liberty. In contrast, pagan mankind remains subject to fate and apparently incapable of really asserting itself. Christianity has certainly improved human behavior and taught mankind every virtue. This divine religion has restored and increased in human beings the three constitutive elements: activity, understanding, and morality. Activity, understanding, morality. In intellect, action, activity, and morality, which is the synthesis of understanding and acting. That what Rosmini will describe as the three forms of being. That what we have seen as the dimensions of the richness of person. That which we have seen when it is when it is missing one of a dimension of these three, we deal with poverty, with human poverty. So here we have a humanizing principle. Christianity as a cultural and humanizing principle, which forms all human institutions. This is the idea of Rosmini, which form the subject of rights. The subject of rights as a result of Christianity, which paradoxically, we said, in modernity, had to be fought against Christianity. And now Rosmini says, because all human societies are simply a complex of bonding of rights and duties, it is clear that the institution of Christian society must have influence on all other societies. Now we understand what it means when Rosmini said that society, that the reform of church is the preposition for the reform of society. That the apport, that the help, that the aim of the church for society is its own reform. Reform of church is the preposition for the reform of society. The rediscovery of what is human person. The real discovery what is brotherhood, what is forgiveness. The real discovery what it means person in its activeness, person as subject of rights. And now we see, and we can interpret, in my understanding, also the affirmations of Pope Francis when he underlines, as we quoted some lessons ago, the importance of the individual dimension of consciousness. No? Pope Francis was criticized when he said the consciousness of person is a very fundamental thing, the conscience of person, the moral conscience of person. Person cannot act against its conscience, that even the Pope has to respect the person in their consciences. This means that also in the Church, Pope Francis wants to respect the people on the principle of person. The principle of person, which in the social doctrine of church until now was always applied to society. The principles of social doctrine of church based on the idea of person were always applied on society, not always to the church herself. In the church herself often were maintained authorical, hierarchical structures which do not represent the dignity of every human being, the dignity of every Christian. And some affirmations of Pope Francis who are disturbing some traditionalist thinkers today, we can interpret as the method that Pope Francis wants to applicate this principle, this fundamental principle, this principle in which the Church has to be an example for society and not the other way around, as it says Rosmini. Now Pope Francis are applicating these principles also to the Church herself. And this is creating, obviously, in some people, some also some threats and some preoccupations. But in my opinion, we can interpret some affirmations, and we will analyze these affirmations in the next lesson as this consequent application of the principle of person, of the respect of person, of the individual freedom of person, of the liberty of religion, of the conscience of person, also to the inside of Church. To respect the people, to make the principle of person, the principle of each Christian, the principle of equality of all the Christians, one of the centers, also of the self-understanding of Church herself towards her own members, towards every Christian, and not only as a social exigency, not only as a social imperative that the Church gives to society. For Rosmini, man realizes his perfections in two ways: in his natures and in his personality. Through two relationships we see, no? The relationship to the absolute and the relationships to other. And the first and the most important of the relationships to others for Rosmini is the family, because this is the realization of the perfection of nature. To the absolute we have the perfection of person. In the family we have the realization of the perfection of nature. So the perfection of nature we have in the domestic society, the perfection of person in the supernatural family, the religious community, the theocratic society, constituted by the transcendental relationship. Moreover, these two fundamental relationships of nature and of personality, ontologically founded, have to be constitutionally realized on the social level. The family and the religious community are the essential elements for a subsidiary structure of society. Civil society and the common good of civil society are all only after the common good of theocratic society and the common good of family. Therefore, Rosmini nominates them the original societies, which with civil society is related only in a subsidiary way. In these original societies, the dimensions of give and forgiveness are realized, and this realization is not a duty of the state, but of individuals. This makes sure that Rosmini has real personalistic realization. This personalistic dimension is improved by the reality of social love, by the reality of forgiveness, by the reality of brotherhood. These are the very effects of the social effects of the Christian announcement and are the contribution of Christianity to that what is a personal structure of society. This personal structure of society, as we saw, is considered in a rational way, but as this rational construction of society on the basis of constitution and of law, it has its very center in the person. And the person and in its liberty can be understood in a full way only in reference to the absolute. This reference to the absolute, the rationality of society, cannot impose to all, cannot recommend, cannot arrive to this from the mere proper forces, but it has to respect it. But because it has to respect the person, this absolute dimension of person is her dignity, is the activity of person, makes sure that the person cannot be wholly included, cannot be thought beginning with the state. We have to think the person beginning with the person herself. And this is the personalistic dimension in Rosmini, and this is that reflection which lies on the ground of these affirmations that we have analyzed in Pope Francis. Thank you also for following this lesson.